The rain fell heavily against the glass windows. Lightning flashed across the dark sky. Inside a luxurious penthouse that looked more like a palace than a home, a young man sat alone in silence. His name was Andrew, 22 years old, a university student, and somehow the husband of 2 billionaire women. My name is Patience. Welcome to Etanalog. Andrew stared at the acceptance letter in his hand. Tomorrow would be his first day at university. Most young men would have been excited. Most young men would have been nervous. Andrew felt something else. Pressure. Not because of school. Not because of money. Money was the last thing he worried about. His wives had enough money to buy entire buildings if they wanted. The problem was different. He slowly looked up. On the giant television screen in front of him, a business interview was playing. The interviewer smiled. Jasmine, your fashion company is now worth billions of dollars. How does that feel? Andrew sighed. Click. He changed the channel. Another interview appeared. The interviewer smiled again. Faith, your movie studio has just signed another international deal. Congratulations. Andrew groaned. Click. Another business channel. Another billionaire. Another success story. Andrew leaned back into the sofa. Then he looked down at his acceptance letter again. Tomorrow he would begin university. And suddenly, for the first time in a long time, he felt small. Very small. What am I even doing with my life? His voice was barely above a whisper. The room remained silent. Then, you are thinking again. Andrew froze. He knew that voice. He slowly turned around. Faith stood at the entrance of the living room. She was still wearing her business suit. Her long dark hair rested neatly on her shoulders. She looked tired, very tired, but her sharp eyes noticed everything. Andrew immediately hid the acceptance letter behind his back. Faith crossed her arms. Andrew. Yes. What is behind your back? Nothing. Andrew. It's nothing. Faith raised one eyebrow. Andrew immediately surrendered. Slowly, he handed her the letter. Faith took it. She read it. Then her expression softened. Just a little. Tomorrow. Andrew nodded. Tomorrow. The room became quiet. Faith sat beside him. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then she asked quietly, Are you scared? Andrew laughed. A fake laugh. The kind people use when they do not want to answer honestly. Faith noticed immediately. Andrew. He sighed. Then finally answered. A little. Faith nodded. I thought so. Andrew looked away. I know it sounds stupid. It doesn't. Look at you. Faith frowned. What about me? You're a billionaire. Faith rolled her eyes. Andrew pointed toward the television. You own a movie empire. Then he pointed upward. Jasmine owns a fashion empire. Then he pointed at himself. And tomorrow I am going to sit in a classroom and learn. Faith stared at him. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something. Then she simply smiled. A rare smile. You are an idiot. Andrew blinked. What? You are an idiot. Andrew looked offended. Faith continued. You think success is a race. It is. No. Yes. No. Andrew groaned. Faith shook her head. Then she gently touched his cheek. Something she rarely did. When I was your age. She paused. I wasn't a billionaire. Andrew looked surprised. Faith smiled. I was struggling. Andrew stayed silent. Faith looked directly into his eyes. You don't need to become me. Andrew blinked. You don't need to become Jasmine. She continued. You only need to become Andrew. The words hit him harder than expected. For a few seconds he couldn't speak. Then, crash! The front door exploded open. Andrew! Andrew immediately smiled. Faith immediately sighed. Jasmine. Only Jasmine entered rooms like a hurricane. She rushed into the living room, carrying shopping bags. Lots of shopping bags. Too many shopping bags. Andrew's eyes widened. What's all that? Jasmine dropped everything onto the floor dramatically. Then she pointed at the bags proudly. Your university supplies. Andrew stared. Faith stared. Andrew slowly picked up one bag. Designer shoes. Another bag. Designer watch. Another bag. Expensive jacket. Another bag. Luxury laptop. Another bag. Luxury tablet. Another bag. Luxury headphones. Andrew looked horrified. Jasmine. She smiled proudly. Yes. This isn't university supplies. It is. No. It is. No. It is. Faith rubbed her forehead. The argument had already started. Andrew opened another bag. A gaming console. He looked at Jasmine. Jasmine looked away. Faith looked at Jasmine. Jasmine looked at the ceiling. Faith closed her eyes. Jasmine. Yes. Why is there a gaming console? Jasmine pointed at Andrew. He gets bored. Faith stared at her. Jasmine smiled. Faith continued staring. Jasmine's smile slowly disappeared. Okay, maybe that one isn't for university. Andrew burst out laughing. Faith looked ready to lose patience. Jasmine immediately sat on Andrew's lap and wrapped her arms around his neck. Don't listen to her. Faith looked disgusted. Andrew laughed. Jasmine kissed his cheek. Then another. Then another. Andrew smiled helplessly. Faith stood up. Unbelievable. Jasmine grinned. Jealous. Faith's eyes narrowed. Andrew immediately froze. Danger. Very dangerous. Jasmine froze too. For several seconds nobody moved. Then Faith calmly walked toward Andrew. She leaned down and kissed his other cheek. Longer. Then she stood up. Jasmine's jaw dropped. Andrew nearly choked. Faith adjusted her suit. There. Jasmine looked offended. That's cheating. Faith shrugged. You started it. Andrew looked from one wife to the other. Then sighed. Tomorrow was university. Tonight was war. And somehow, he had a feeling university would be easier than surviving these two women. The next morning, Andrew was sleeping peacefully. Very peacefully. Too peacefully. Then, Andrew! His eyes flew open. He nearly rolled off the bed. What? Jasmine stood beside the bed, smiling. Far too happily for someone disturbing another human being at 6 a.m. Andrew grabbed his chest. You almost killed me. Jasmine giggled. Good morning. It is not a good morning. It is. No. It is. Andrew groaned and buried his face in the pillow. Then Jasmine pulled the pillow away. Andrew stared at her. Jasmine stared back. Andrew reached for the pillow. Jasmine moved it away. Andrew reached again. Jasmine moved it again. Andrew sighed. Why are you like this? Jasmine smiled proudly. Because I love you. Andrew immediately lost the argument. Every single time. Meanwhile, across the room, Faith stood near the door, watching everything. Arms crossed. Expression serious. Andrew. Andrew sat up immediately. Faith's voice always had that effect. Yes. Get ready. Andrew looked confused. I'm awake. Faith pointed at the clock. You have 30 minutes. Andrew looked at the clock. Then looked at Faith. Then looked at the clock again. Then immediately jumped out of bed. Oh. Faith nodded. Exactly. Jasmine laughed so hard she nearly fell over. 30 minutes later, Andrew stood in front of a giant mirror and almost didn't recognize himself. New clothes, new shoes, new watch, new backpack. Everything looked expensive. Very expensive. Andrew touched the watch, then looked at Jasmine. How much did this cost? Jasmine smiled. Andrew looked at Faith. Faith looked away. That was never a good sign. Andrew slowly repeated the question. How much? Neither woman answered. Andrew immediately understood. The answer was dangerous. Very dangerous. He decided not to ask again. The university campus was beautiful. Large buildings, green fields, hundreds of students walking everywhere. Some looked nervous. Some looked excited. Some looked completely lost. Andrew belonged to the third group. He stood near the entrance, looking around. Wow! Then he noticed something strange. People were staring. A lot. Andrew looked behind him. Nothing. Looked left. Nothing. Looked right. Then realized they weren't looking at him. They were looking at the two luxury cars parked nearby. One belonged to Jasmine. The other belonged to Faith. And standing beside them were Jasmine and Faith, two stunning billionaire women, waiting for their husband. Andrew immediately covered his face. Oh no! Jasmine waved happily. Several students noticed. More people started staring. Andrew wanted the ground to open and swallow him. Faith noticed. What's wrong? Everyone is staring. Jasmine looked around, then smiled. They should? Andrew groaned. Faith sighed. Jasmine really wasn't helping. After registration, after orientation, after what felt like 100 introductions, Andrew finally returned home. Completely exhausted. The moment he entered the penthouse, he collapsed onto the sofa. "I'm done." Jasmine immediately appeared. With snacks. Faith appeared with books. Andrew looked at both women, then looked at the snacks, then looked at the books, then looked back at the snacks. Jasmine smiled victoriously. Faith narrowed her eyes. Andrew. Andrew froze. "Yes. Study." Jasmine sat beside him. "No." Faith looked at her. "No. No." Faith stared. Jasmine crossed her arms. "He just came back." Faith crossed her arms too. "He has assignments." Jasmine shook her head. "He needs rest." Faith pointed at the books. "He needs education." Jasmine pointed at the snacks. "He needs happiness." Faith pointed at Andrew. "He needs discipline." Jasmine pointed at Andrew. "He needs love." Andrew slowly stood up. Very slowly. Neither woman noticed. They were too busy arguing. Andrew quietly began backing away. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Then, Andrew. He froze. Faith. Caught. Again. Slowly he turned around. Faith pointed toward the hallway. "Come to my room." Andrew immediately knew he was in trouble. Jasmine burst out laughing. Faith looked at her. Jasmine stopped laughing. Immediately, Faith's room was large, elegant, organized. Every single thing had its place, unlike Jasmine's room, which looked like a luxury tornado had passed through it. Faith sat at her desk. Andrew sat opposite her. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Faith sighed. "Do you know why I brought you here?" Andrew nodded. "No." Faith closed her eyes. "You were escaping." Andrew smiled nervously. Faith pointed at him. "Exactly." Andrew laughed. "A little." Faith did not. A few seconds later, her expression softened. "Andrew." "Yes." "What do you actually want?" Andrew blinked. "What? What do you want?" Andrew frowned. Faith continued. "Not what Jasmine wants. Not what I want. What do you want?" Andrew sat quietly. For the first time all day, he couldn't joke, couldn't laugh, couldn't escape. Because honestly, he didn't know. And that scared him. Faith noticed immediately. Her expression softened again. "You don't have to figure everything out today." Andrew looked up. Faith smiled slightly. "But one day you will." Andrew nodded. Slowly, thoughtfully, for once, without making a joke. That evening, dinner was surprisingly peaceful. No arguments, no competition, no lectures, just laughter, stories, and food. Lots of food. At one point, Andrew looked at Jasmine, then Faith, then Jasmine again. A small smile appeared on his face. "What?" Jasmine asked. Andrew shook his head. "Nothing." Faith narrowed her eyes. "That's never a good answer." Andrew laughed, then spoke softly. "I was just thinking." Both women looked at him. Andrew smiled. "I'm lucky." The room became quiet. Jasmine's smile faded. Faith looked away. Neither woman expected that answer. Andrew continued. "I know I complain." Jasmine nodded. "A lot." Faith nodded too. "A lot." Andrew ignored them. "But I'm happy." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Jasmine suddenly stood up, walked around the table, grabbed Andrew's face, and kissed him. Faith rolled her eyes. Jasmine smiled proudly. Then Faith stood up too. Andrew immediately knew where this was going, and sighed, because once again, he would need to make sure neither wife felt left out. And somehow, this was becoming a full-time job. The next few weeks passed surprisingly fast, at least for everyone except Andrew. For Andrew, university felt like an entirely different planet. Every day he woke up. Every day Faith reminded him to study. Every day Jasmine reminded him to relax. And every day Andrew somehow survived both of them. Barely. One afternoon, Andrew sat alone beneath a large tree on campus. His laptop rested on his lap. Several students walked past, laughing, talking, taking pictures, making plans. Andrew watched them quietly, then sighed. University was strange. He had attended classes, submitted assignments, answered questions, but somehow, He still didn't have any real friends. Not because people hated him. Actually, the opposite. Many students wanted to talk to him. The problem was his life was weird. Very weird. How exactly was he supposed to explain? Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm married to 2 billionaire women. Nice to meet you. Yeah. No. That wasn't happening. A voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. You're Andrew, right? Andrew looked up. A young man stood nearby. Simple clothes. Friendly face. Confident smile. Andrew nodded. Yeah. The young man sat beside him. I'm Lucas. Andrew smiled. Andrew. Lucas laughed. I know. Andrew laughed too. Fair enough. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Lucas pointed at the laptop. You into tech? Andrew immediately became interested. A little. Lucas looked shocked. A little. Andrew grinned. Okay, a lot. Lucas smiled. So am I. For the first time that day, Andrew genuinely smiled. 3 days later, Andrew had somehow gained 3 friends. Lucas, Noah, and Ethan. They weren't rich. They weren't famous. They were just normal students. And honestly, that was exactly what Andrew needed. For the first time since entering university, he felt normal. Not someone's husband. Not someone's responsibility. Not the center of an argument between 2 billionaires. Just Andrew, a student. One afternoon after class, the 4 friends sat together discussing technology. Noah loved programming. Lucas loved gaming. Ethan loved hardware. Andrew loved visual effects. Movies. CGI. Animation. Digital worlds. He could talk about them for hours. Imagine creating your own movie effects, Andrew said excitedly. Lucas nodded. That would be insane. Andrew's eyes lit up. Imagine creating entire worlds. Noah laughed. Bro, you sound obsessed. Andrew smiled. Maybe he was. A little. Meanwhile, inside Faith's office, Faith sat behind her desk reviewing documents. Her assistant entered. You seem happy today. Faith looked up. I do. The assistant smiled. You do. Faith looked back at her computer. A small smile appeared. Very small. Almost invisible. Andrew made friends. The assistant blinked. Then laughed. That's why. Faith nodded. That's why. The assistant couldn't help smiling. Faith truly loved that boy, even if she spent half her life yelling at him. That evening, the penthouse was unusually noisy. Andrew sat on the floor, laughing. Jasmine sat beside him, also laughing. Both were playing a racing game. Very seriously. Or at least, they thought they were serious. Ha! Jasmine shouted. I'm winning. Andrew looked horrified. No. Yes. No. Yes. Then the front door opened. Faith entered. Silence. Immediate silence. Andrew paused the game. Jasmine paused the game. Faith looked at both of them. Then at the giant television. Then at the snacks everywhere. Then at the textbooks, lying untouched on the coffee table. Faith slowly closed her eyes. Andrew whispered, We should run. Jasmine nodded. We should run. Faith opened her eyes. Too late. Andrew. Andrew stood up immediately. Yes. Come here. Andrew looked at Jasmine. Jasmine looked away. Traitor. A few minutes later, Andrew sat inside Faith's office. Again, he was starting to spend more time there than his own room. Faith sat across from him, watching him. Andrew smiled nervously. Faith wasn't impressed. How many hours? Andrew blinked. What? How many hours? Andrew knew exactly what she meant. And unfortunately, so did Faith. 2. Faith stared. Andrew corrected himself. 3. Faith continued staring. Andrew sighed. 5. Faith nodded. There it is. Andrew lowered his head. Caught. Again. But then something unexpected happened. Faith didn't yell. She didn't lecture him. She simply asked, Are you happy? Andrew looked surprised. What? At university. Andrew thought for a moment, then smiled. Actually, yeah. Faith's expression softened. You made friends. Andrew nodded. Faith smiled slightly. You needed that. Andrew looked surprised. Faith rarely admitted things like that. Then she stood, walked around the desk, and gently fixed his collar. A simple gesture, but one that made Andrew smile. Study, Faith said quietly. Andrew laughed. There it is. Faith rolled her eyes. Later that night, the three of them sat together on the balcony. The city lights stretched endlessly into the distance. A cool breeze filled the air. Nobody spoke for a while. Sometimes silence felt comfortable. This was one of those times. Then Jasmine suddenly leaned her head against Andrew's shoulder. Faith looked at them, then quietly leaned against his other shoulder. Andrew froze. Neither woman seemed willing to move. Andrew smiled. The situation was ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. But somehow it felt right. Below them, the city continued moving. People rushed home. Cars filled the roads. Businesses stayed open. Dreams were being built. Lives were changing. And for the first time since university began, Andrew realized something. Maybe Faith was right. Maybe university wasn't just about classes. Maybe it wasn't just about getting a degree. Maybe it was about discovering who he wanted to become. The thought stayed in his mind. Long after the conversation ended. Long after everyone went to sleep. Long after the lights were turned off. And for the first time, Andrew found himself genuinely curious about the future. The semester continued. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. And somehow, Andrew was actually surviving university. Not perfectly, but surviving. Which, according to Faith, was already an achievement. According to Jasmine, it was proof that Andrew deserved a vacation. Every week. One afternoon, Andrew sat inside a lecture hall. The professor continued talking. And talking. And talking. Andrew tried to focus. He really did. But his phone vibrated. Once. Twice. 3 times. Andrew slowly looked down. Jasmine. Of course. He opened the messages. Jasmine, are you bored? Andrew smiled. I'm in class. A few seconds later. That means yes. Andrew laughed. The student beside him looked confused. Andrew immediately pretended to cough. Then another message arrived. A picture. Jasmine was standing inside one of her fashion stores, holding up a ridiculous hat. The caption read, "Should I buy this?" Andrew stared at the picture, then typed, "Absolutely not." Jasmine replied instantly, "Too late." Andrew covered his face. That evening, Faith was reviewing Andrew's notes, a habit she somehow developed. Andrew sat nearby, watching television. Jasmine sat beside him, eating snacks. Faith looked up. Andrew. Andrew already knew that tone. "Yes. Your notes." Andrew sighed. "What about them?" Faith placed them on the table. "They're actually good." Andrew blinked. Jasmine blinked. The room became silent. Faith rarely gave compliments. Very rarely. Andrew sat up immediately. "Wait!" Faith looked confused. "What?" "You said something nice." Faith rolled her eyes. Jasmine gasped dramatically. "Oh my God!" Faith immediately regretted speaking. Andrew smiled. A genuine smile. And for some reason, Faith looked happy about it, even though she tried not to show it. A few weeks later, the university announced a student event. Games, competitions, technology exhibitions, music, food, activities everywhere. The campus became alive. Students filled every corner. Andrew attended with Lucas, Noah, and Ethan. The 4 friends spent hours exploring everything. For the first time, Andrew felt completely part of university life. Not an outsider, not someone being dragged around, just another student having fun. And honestly, he loved it. Then disaster happened. Lucas pointed toward the entrance. "Dude!" Andrew looked up, then froze. 2 luxury cars, 2 familiar women, 2 very recognizable billionaire wives. Andrew immediately knew. His peaceful afternoon was over. Jasmine waved excitedly. Faith walked calmly beside her. The crowd immediately noticed. Whispers started spreading. Students began staring. Phones appeared. Andrew wanted to disappear. Immediately, Lucas looked shocked. Noah looked shocked. Ethan looked shocked. Everyone looked shocked. Lucas slowly pointed. "You know them." Andrew sighed. Deeply. Very deeply. Then answered. Unfortunately. 5 minutes later, the introductions were complete. Nobody knew what to say. Not even Lucas. And Lucas always had something to say. Finally, Jasmine smiled. "You boys take care of Andrew." Lucas nodded immediately. "Of course." Faith added. "And make sure he studies." The three friends looked confused, then looked at Andrew, then laughed. Very hard. Andrew was not amused. Later that evening, the three returned home. Andrew was exhausted, completely exhausted. He collapsed onto the sofa. Jasmine immediately sat beside him. Faith sat on the other side. Andrew smiled. Comfortable. Jasmine kissed his cheek. Faith looked at her. Jasmine smiled. Faith immediately leaned forward and kissed Andrew's other cheek. Andrew laughed. Here we go again. Several minutes later, Jasmine rested her head on Andrew's shoulder. Faith rested against his other shoulder. Nobody spoke. The room felt peaceful, warm, safe, comfortable. Then Jasmine suddenly asked, "Who loves Andrew more?" Andrew immediately sat up. "No." Faith closed her eyes. "No." Jasmine smiled. "Why not?" Andrew pointed at both women. "Because every time somebody asks that question, chaos happens." Faith nodded. "He's right." Jasmine pouted. Andrew laughed, then pulled both women closer. One arm around Jasmine, one arm around Faith. Equal. Always equal. That rule had saved his life many times. A few days later, something surprising happened. Andrew voluntarily opened a textbook. Faith nearly dropped her coffee. Jasmine nearly dropped her phone. Andrew looked offended. "What?" Faith stared. "You opened a textbook." Andrew stared back. "So?" Faith looked at Jasmine. Jasmine looked at Faith. Neither trusted what they were seeing. Andrew sighed. "I'm not that bad." Faith raised an eyebrow. Andrew pointed at the textbook. "I'm trying." The room became quiet. Faith smiled. A real smile. The kind she rarely showed. And somehow, that felt better than any compliment. That night, Andrew sat alone on the balcony, looking at the city lights, thinking. 4 months, university had simply been something he attended, something he survived, something his wives paid for. But now, something felt different. He had friends. He had goals. He had interests. And for the first time, he was beginning to imagine a future that belonged to him. Not Jasmine's future. Not Faith's future. His. A small smile appeared on his face. Then the balcony door opened. Jasmine stepped outside, followed by Faith. Neither said anything. They simply sat beside him, one on each side, exactly where they always seemed to end up. Andrew smiled, then looked at both women. The women who loved him, supported him, argued about him, spoiled him, protected him, and sometimes drove him completely insane. "I love you both." The words came out quietly, naturally. Neither woman answered immediately. Jasmine squeezed his hand. Faith squeezed his other hand. That was enough. More than enough. And as the city lights sparkled below them, Andrew realized something. University was only the beginning. His life was finally moving forward, and neither he nor his wives had any idea what was waiting for them next. And we'll stop here for today. If you want part 2, let me know in the comments. Don't be shy. By the way, thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like. Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more.